FM. You're hanging out with Leah on Table Talk this morning, and we've been talking about lots of big things when it comes to people coming to Australia. We were looking at refugees as part of Refugee Week all this week, and then we've also touched on migration as well generally. And to speak to me more specifically about migrants and different visas around is Melanie Macfarlane, immigration expert. Melanie, thanks so much for joining me on Table Talk this morning.
Thanks so much for having me, Leah.
Now, Melanie, there's been so many changes to visas, over the last couple of years. Obviously, on the back of COVID, we needed to clamp down on where people were coming from, depending on the situation in their country. And then, now that sort of that is lifted and there's travel happening again, I feel like a lot of those things are still up in the air. We're trying to get international students back in because there have been such a deficit of them, leaving after COVID. What is happening with, the visas, and what are some of the changes that have gone through over the last few years in different iterations?
Well, yeah, it's a really good question because, as you say, things have, obviously with border closure, we couldn't have any international students coming in for 2 years.
Yeah.
And that was a big blow to the economy because it's essentially before COVID, it was a $40 billion industry creating about 240,000 jobs, which is more than iron ore, actually, over there in WA. So that was a big blow. But then the borders were opened and the numbers have been coming up and up because Australia is still seen as a popular study destination. But the issue that we're seeing right now is that it's twofold. There's suddenly a lot of visa refusals coming through, which is unusual. And I myself, for example, have offices in Latin America and bring over a lot of Latin American students from Colombia, Mexico, and Chile, to name but a few countries. And we're seeing an increase in the rise of refusals from there, which is nonsensical in my opinion, because those are the areas where, you can bring more diversity of students from Latin America. It's very far from Australia. So we've put in a lot of marketing money to promote Australia as a study destination because students, they could go to America, Canada, the UK, and etc. But they are, they are wanting to come back to Australia. So it's not good to have those visas refused. But there's also the 408 COVID visa, which is still around, that the government brought in to help those who were going to leave. And the students are coming here and some of them are jumping on that just to work full time, it's not ideal. And a lot of us in the industry would want to remove it if we could.
Right. Okay. So are there a lot of people taking sort of advantage of that, the 408 COVID visa? Are they people who are trying to be students to come back, so they're not genuine? Because I know there's this whole sort of conversation around genuine students and what makes up a genuine student. Is that sort of the route that people are going so that they can just work? And is that where some of the controversy lies? Because to me, it doesn't make sense then, because you'd just think I don't know, wouldn't you just study here? I don't know. It's not my world, not my field, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. What's happened is international students were given full-time work rights from January last year, and that's coming to an end on the 1st of July this year.
Okay.
So they had full-time work rights anyway, so they could come in and study and work full-time. But I guess if you're going to offer someone something and they have the opportunity to work full-time and then study after that, well, they might take it, you know? As well-intentioned as they are to study genuinely, they might think, well, I'll come and study English for 6 months, then I'll work full-time, and then I'll go on to university, what have you afterwards. So if you're going to offer them that kind of opportunity, well, why wouldn't you take it? A lot of them, are young. They're a bit like working holiday makers. They're coming to seek opportunities and travel and so on. And so why wouldn't you take that opportunity? But the other thing is that we're seeing is this genuine temporary entry requirement, which was cited in the migration review as something that really doesn't work any longer and will be removed. It hasn't been, and it's the reason that these visa refusals are coming through. So it's just not. It's not right, and something really needs to happen now and needs to shift.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you more about those refusals as well. We're just going to go to a short break, and we're going to be right back with Melanie Macfarlane about the refusals that is happening for people who are trying to migrate into Australia. We'll be right back. Hanging out with Leah on Table Talk this morning, and I've been talking to Melanie Macfarlane, who is an immigration expert, all about the different visas and the changing visas, and of course about this sort of idea about what makes up a genuine student, and the way that they are migrating, and then the refusals, which is kind of what I want to move on to now, Melanie, as well, because to me, that is really a bizarre thing to really clamp down on refusals when we really do need international students coming through, especially like you said before, they do contribute so much to the economy. And I wonder as well if you know more about in terms of migrants that then might be part of the skilled workers, because we've got a labour shortage as well. So what's sort of happening with these refusals around the international students to start? Why are they getting turned down?
Well, for some, in my opinion, kind of silly reasons, actually. I mean, there's a lot of refusals, and a lot of them are cut and paste,
Sure.
in all honesty, which is not fair either, because they're supposed to be given, due process and looked at on a case-by-case basis. But a lot of the refusals cite the prevailing economic conditions in their home countries as the reason to refuse, because they're saying that even if they are coming here to study, they don't. The case officer, the delegate, doesn't believe that they'll be making any more money from their salaries when they return to their home country, so why should they be studying in the first place?
Oh,
Which is a bit nonsensical, frankly. I mean, everyone studies overseas to improve their English levels and to have a qualification overseas, which looks good for their employment when they return.
Yeah,
and also things like, well, you've got family ties to return to your home country, but we don't think that's enough for you to return. So therefore, you're not going to return.
Yeah, right. They are some strange things then, really, because that doesn't really make sense either. Of course, a family tie is definitely strong enough.
I know, and especially actually, in Latin America, families are so important.
Exactly.
So if you're the only sibling or what have you who's over here in Australia, you're going to go back because, you will. And anyway, statistics show that 1 in 7 students do go back, and those who stay, well, frankly, they've got the skill set that Australia needs. And what's wrong with that?
Yes.
Considering this massive skill shortage we have right now.
Exactly. And I suppose that leads to the next part of that as well, is about skills shortage in general. Do you know much about what's happening with the visas in terms of getting people to fill a lot of the gaps that, Australians just don't want to take? A lot of the agricultural work, they don't want to do that kind of work. And, we're missing that backpackers influx that we had that was fueling that part of that industry. Is there any changes, or is that on the rise, or what can you tell me about that sort of side of things?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly the Pacific workers coming in has definitely alleviated that somewhat in agriculture, for example. And there's some good things that have been done with regards to the PALM scheme and what have you. But the visas are definitely coming through more quickly now for skill shortage areas, in terms of people coming from overseas to fill jobs in, let's say, IT, engineering, and hospitality too, actually, which was a critical sector during COVID. Yeah. There's the aged care labour agreement, which has been set up, and there's some good things are happening, but there's no doubt that students tend to, they tend to initially do jobs that, yes, Australians are not going to do. That's not you want them to be doing that all the time, and it's good that they've now, from the 1st of July, got part-time hours where they can do a part-time job and potentially work in their skilled area. But this will continue. I mean, we had a massive experiment which was called COVID and 2 years of border closure to show that migrants are temporary or permanent. They are essential to assist Australia's economy. So, that's the thing. And international students will always be important. So, let's remove this genuine temporary entry requirement and stop the refusal.
Yeah. Is that what you would mainly like to see, is the removal of that temporary entrant requirement? Or is there anything else? What would be your ideal situation and change to visas?
Yes, I'd like to see government regulate some of the providers more. Education agents get blamed a lot, but the fact of the matter is education providers as well are allowed to continue even if they're not doing the right thing. And there's a particular part of the visa, if students are jumping from university to a lower level course, there is a condition in their visa that says that visa can be cancelled. Well, the government needs to police that more because they're not at the moment, and so people are carrying on doing it.
Right.
So there's a lot that the government can actually regulate and enforce, which would help to increase the calibre and the quality of international education as well for Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Melanie, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate your insight to everything, visas and migrants and everything, because it's a world that I think sometimes we can, turn a blind eye to because it might not affect us, but it's really important information that we know how much these wonderful migrants are contributing to our society as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks a lot.